Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, it's Thanksgiving week, and I'm kind of exhausted at this point. And I haven't done any of the Thanksgiving work. My wife's been doing all that. I've just done a little bit of cleaning. She's really been doing every damn thing. But for me, I had this kind of dinner thing in New York City on Sunday night, hosted by my pal and past podcast, Jesse Scheidlauer. And I got home kind of late by my standards. And then I was back in New York on Monday for a podcast in Brooklyn and a great monologue slideshow performance by past guest David Leopold that night. It was about the music-related drawings of Al Hirschfeld, and David was Hirschfeld's archivist and works with the Al Hirschfeld Foundation and all this. And anyway, I got home less late, but I keep waking up my normal time, which is around 5 a.m. So basically, I'm glad not to be going anywhere until I pick up some friends at the train station on Thanksgiving. The party at Jesse's was great, although traffic getting into the city on a Sunday night was god-awful. But I got to catch up with a whole bunch of friends, people I used to see. Jesse would throw this recurring get-together in the before time. And it was just such a joy to see some of them and just catch up, even if, I look all crazy now, because most of them have not seen me all these years. And I used to meet new people at this party that he threw, but this time was a little less of that, partly because I just spent so much time catching up with old pals, and we had so much to talk about, but also because I think I've aged out of the ability to hear most people speaking in a party setting. So each time I connected with somebody, we kind of moved off to the side and talked like in an alcove or doorway of the guest bedroom or whatever. Doing that with somebody I have just met would be a little weird. So unfortunately, I didn't really get to talk to anybody new, but I did get to talk to some old friends, which really is wonderful. But I want to share this bizarre thing before we get to this week's show that happened to me on Monday. David Leopold's event was at City Winery in New York City, right by the Hudson. And it has a garage built right next door. So I parked there, and I took the subway to Brooklyn to go record, came back that evening, got some dinner, late coffee, on to David's event, finish up, go down to the garage, and the attendant says, did you see the side of your car? And I said, yeah, don't worry. It's already like that. I got T-boned back in August. It's not you. Don't worry. It was me. Because this was during the summer of taking my dad to all sorts of medical appointments, which I never really told you guys about, but it was an added factor in why the past bunch of months have been pretty rough for me. Anyway, this accident happened on the way to one of those appointments, and it led to a dent in the left passenger door, rear door, and some major scratches around the rear left side on both sides of the wheel. Anyway, the attendant says, no, I mean, I fixed it. Did you see? Now, I was pretty bleary at this point. It's been a long day and a half for me. I dropped the car around 2 p.m. I told him I'd be back by 8:30 or 9 that night to pick it up, which is around when this was. And I was pretty burned out and wrecked at this moment in time. I mean, I was good enough to drive, but maybe not to cognitively parse what this attendant was telling me. But he pulled the car out from its spot, and I could see in the fluorescent garage light, all the scratches were gone, as was the dent. I had no idea what to make of this. I kind of thanked the guy, handed him $5 as a tip, and headed home. And I thought, I did not see what is going on here. I'll look at it in daylight tomorrow and see what's what. And son of a bitch, if I don't go out this morning and look at this car and find that all the scratches are gone, the dent is gone, and there's just these 3 little spots where the paint was like fully flaked off. But otherwise, he somehow fixed all this. I have no idea how or why, to be honest. But next time I go to City Winery, which will be the second time I ever go, if that guy, I'm going down to the garage, and if that guy's working there, I will give him $50 and a kiss on the lips. I'd been putting off taking this thing into the garage for the longest time to get repaired. I mean, and boom, I just brought the car in, and this is what happened. So anyway, weird miracles abound is what I'm trying to say, even when you aren't fully aware of what's going on around you, I guess. So anyway, let's get to this week's show. Now, my guest is the cartoonist and editor Matt Borse. Now, Matt he was the editor, and he ran the late lamented comics magazine, The Nib. And I know most of my episodes are around creators' new projects, like their upcoming book or the thing that's just out this week. But this time, Matt and I sat down for basically a post-mortem to talk about what the Nib was and what it meant to him and its audience and its contributors, and why he decided it was time to close up shop after 10 years of providing this really important venue for cartoonists in political comics, nonfiction work, and other modes of graphic journalism at a really critical time at a minimum, America's history, if not the world's. And most importantly, the Nib actually paid its contributors, which is usually where the model breaks down for comics anthologies or comics in general. Matt and his colleagues really built something that was, we'll say, sort of sustainable. And that is no mean feat for the arts nowadays. He made a cultural contribution and made a difference in his artists, in the contributors' lives. So this fall, Matt was on a bit of a farewell tour for the Nib after announcing it was going to close down earlier this year. And we crossed paths at the small press expo in September, and I told him I'd love to sit down for a conversation sometime about this and about him, and he and I had never really just talked one-on-one. So when we recrossed paths at CXC, Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, in October, we made definitive plans, and on that Sunday morning, we got together for this talk. Now, the night before that was a big going-away party for the Nib, and a bunch of the contributors were there, and a lot of people were telling stories. It was a karaoke night. I attended just so I could hear some of the early stuff and not do karaoke. And Matt kicked it off with a little speech, and he told a great anecdote of the time our late friend Tom Spurgeon, the co-founder of CXC, the event we were at, once told Matt, I guess 2017, 2018 maybe, the Nib could close down tomorrow and you would have a permanent place. It would have a permanent place in the Comics Hall of Fame, or something to that effect. Like I say, I'm kind of tired, but that was what Tom was getting across to Matt. As ever, Tom was right. The Nib meant a lot to cartoonists and to readers. And I hope it'll inspire others to make good comics and speak truth to power and raise more voices and find more viewpoints than your own, to really go out there and search for other people. And maybe this will inspire someone else to launch their version of the Nib going forward. And maybe they'll actually pay contributors too and build something that's going to matter and that's going to, reward artists for doing the heavy work they have to do. Meanwhile, Matt helped build something great, and I am looking forward to the next act in his creative career. So the only real caveat here is we were recording in my hotel room. They vacuumed in the hallway about 40 minutes into the talk, and you're going to hear it. But here's Matt's bio. Matt Borse is an Eisner-winning comics editor and two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist in cartooning. In 2013, he founded The Nib, which published 6,000 comics, 3 books, and 15 issues of an award-winning print magazine. In 2017, he was the executive producer and head writer for 2 seasons of The Nib Animation, produced by Topic with Augenblick Studios. His comics have appeared in The Nation, The Guardian, Village Voice, CNN, The Intercept, and were collected in his book, We Should Improve Society Somewhat. He also drew the graphic novel War is Boring, written by David Axe, and has edited comics for In These Times magazine. His latest project is Justice Warriors, a dystopian satire created with artist Ben Clarkson from Ahoy Comics. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Matt Borse. I know we're at the end point of the story, but tell me about the origin of the nib.
The origin of the nib is in 2013. There was a lot of new media money sloshing around, and a website called Medium was launching. And now this was a project of Ev Williams, who's a billionaire founder of Twitter. Mm-hmm. And this was like, and he did Blogger too. So this is sort of an evolution of that progression, I guess, or maybe a reversion back from the microblogging of Twitter to like the maxi blogging. I mean, it was a platform for writing, which 10 years later they have everywhere, Substack and everything. But they wanted to do it with publications, and they had some kind of role imagined for publications kind of moving to platforms. And I knew a guy, David Axe, who was a war correspondent, and I did a graphic novel with him called War is Boring, which was a memoir of his time being a war correspondent. And I think he had pitched War is Boring, not the graphic novel, but it was like his overarching blog and publication to Medium. And he said to me, man, these guys are paying really well. They're paying by traffic. And he, introduced me to an editor there, Evan Hansen. And I had an idea for a comics publication in mind already, sort of. It was a little bit of a dream of mine. I had spent a couple years editing comics at various publications. Mm-hmm. And, I just pitched them on if I can get political cartoons and nonfiction and some cartoons that weren't political, especially in the beginning. We had kind of like some of the early webcomics contingent, like Zach Wienersmith and Rich Stevens. I said, if I can bring all these people under one umbrella, it'll do better than any publication you have. Right. I mean, I didn't quite say it like that, but I mean,
But you knew it in your heart.
Yeah, I did, and it did do pretty much better than anything that Medium had going. Certainly better than any out of house publication, because there was all these distinctions. There was like freelance publications, and then there was the ones that they like owned and launched themselves. And the Nib did well enough that I'm pretty certain that I was the only freelancer that ever made it on staff at Medium. So, it was very much a moment in media and tech. Like, I was still working at home in Portland, remote, and then I would fly down to Medium offices in San Francisco once in a while. And, they had nap pods and baristas, and they even, I mean, it was a little bit, we had all these things we had to constantly be doing and, posting things, and we had to get traffic, and we had to do this and that. And then at 3 p.m. in the office, this guy would walk through slowly and clang these bells. Ding. And that was the time, that signaled that it was time for meditation. I didn't partake because I had things to do, but it was that type of environment that was, would become heavily parodied. And I was just like, what is this stuff? And then, of course, as is the story with these things, they were into us until they weren't. And then, 2 years later, after it started, they just quickly pivoted to something else. And kind of like that, we were laid off and on our own.
Pivot to video. That was the, I've recently made a joke about that on yet another social media platform that's going to be dead in a year or two. So, But how did it change from what you envisioned? I mean, you said you had a model in mind beforehand. A, did it fit with that? And B, how did it evolve, over the decade?
At first it was, at the time, everybo's in political cartooning, their clients were collapsing. Print media was collapsing. I, for instance, I kind of came in at the tail end in the beginning of the 2000s and looked at all these guys like Durf and Tom Tomorrow, and I was like, oh my God, you can make a living at this stuff. And then
then you got to know them.
And by 2008, the 2008 crash had a big effect on alt weeklies, and I lost a lot of my big clients as a result of it. I mean, I was never making a ton of money, let's be clear, but I was doing it.
Yeah, you have a level that you're
and after that, it was not great. I didn't really have a ton, but I did have a lot of support online. My stuff traveled around Facebook and Twitter and all this, and I was figuring out different ways to piece together a career. I did a Kickstarter, I did this and that. I was editing for sites like I mentioned. And I guess the idea is bring all these disparate people together under an umbrella, Jen Sorensen, Tom Tomorrow, and on. And that there's enough people who want to read this stuff regularly, daily, that, well, there wasn't money involved. There wasn't any kind of subscription or revenue model involved at the time. But, even back then I could see people would pay for it. People would subscribe to it like an actual publication. And even back then I thought that it could be a print publication.
Yeah, that's what I wonder, how you evolved from being an online magazine or online, we'll call it a magazine, into having print incarnations like that.
I've always been a print guy.
I was telling Klaus, I unfortunately had to read Monica as a PDF the first time.
Awful.
And,
I wouldn't.
They sent it to me, and I was
I guess you have to.
oh
for
God,
the pod,
I really want to read this in print. I picked it up the moment we got here to Columbus. I'm like, I need this in hardcover and print, and reread it the morning before we recorded, so I'd get that visceral
that
experience.
That fresh off the press smell.
Yeah,
I'm a print guy and a magazine guy in particular. I've always read magazines a lot. Subscribed to a number of them since I was really young. The Nation and New Yorker and Harper's, and cycled through them, and more lefty stuff or more, I don't know, obscure arty stuff or whatever. I was into all kinds of stuff, and but as I launched the Nib and everything, I was, there was kind of my career at that point. Maybe I was 10 years into my career, and it was constantly this refrain of print is dying and all this, and I was like, obviously there were problems, but I was like, people still want to read in print. You can't read everything on your phone. And I became obsessed with magazines as a thing. And over the first 5 years of the Nib, I would start subscribing to just everything. I would subscribe to stuff just because I liked the way they laid things out or their paper stock. And I amassed a kind of collection of magazines. My wife thought I was crazy for a while, and I was like, no.
She knew, but anyway, go on. Yeah.
Well, she was. I said I'm going to make a magazine. I said that's why I'm doing this. I'm not totally.
Yeah, I
crazy.
need to be an online tech guy, and I'll transform into a new media. No.
So I was trying to figure it out in my head, like what would a comics magazine look like, and so it was long gestating. And I think the Nib people I worked with will tell you that I was, talking about all these magazine ideas for years. And then,
what were the models you were thinking of, like World War III Illustrated, or did you have existing templates in mind?
There's not a specific magazine because there's so many, but honestly, not like World War III Illustrated, because that's more like, it's mostly stapled, the ones that I've seen. I was, trying to do a little, like a higher end square bound magazine with really nice paper stock. This is the mid 2010s, so the kind of magazine as object was really big at the time. There was a ton of small press magazines. And I was like, okay, we need to make a $15 magazine. You make a Time magazine if you have a circulation in the millions, because you're charging God knows what for advertising space. But so I knew that I wasn't going to be making like a massively, tens of thousands of copies of a magazine, and that this is going to be something that, kind of a magazine that you keep on your shelf, which I think some people do. So that was the idea.
Yeah. Tell me about the editorial eye versus the cartooning eye. When did you realize you had a facility for editing? Because they're very different skills, and you're working. Well, talk about.
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't think about that a lot, but I guess it's like I think I developed some kind of skill where I would get a client and I would pitch them on my work, and they'd say okay, and I would want there to be more comics, and I would say, like, why don't I run the comics section, or why don't you pull in this person and that person, give me some money and I'll edit it. I did that in these Times magazine, a short-lived magazine called Not Safe for Work Corp, where I was a comics editor, at Cartoon Movement, where I became a comics journalism editor prior to the nib launching. So I just started doing that. Like there was all these stories about comics pages are dying and prints dying, and I just was kind of not aggressive in my pitching, but I guess I developed a part of me that sort of knows how to talk to business people, and that's what allowed me to survive for a short while in that sort of tech world where you have to talk to business and marketing people in a language that kind of turns your mind to mush, right? And most people, I don't even think, have it in them to
communication is key to a win-win relationship.
Yes, it is.
For my own business-to-business magazine editing, that was a line. We'll leverage our unique synergies to shots on goal so we get a springboard to success.
Exactly. The way you would, and it wasn't it wasn't like that at like Indies Times magazine or Not Safe for Work Corp, but
you still had to understand a different language.
Yeah, the way you pitch a comics page to business people is different than how you pitch it to the cartoonists involved. You talk about the creativity and the money that we're going to get. Hey, I can pay you this much for a comic. You can do whatever you want. Just run it by me. Everybody loves a new gig, so they're happy to say yes. Then, to the publishers, you got to talk about, reader engagement, and this guy has 80,000 followers on Twitter, whatever.
I have no idea how those metrics even count anymore. For the number of times I get hit with we will get you 10,000 followers, and I'm like, those are just bots. But whatever. Yeah.
I don't think most of that stuff definitely doesn't matter anymore. It used to result in things like traffic and readers and people who would give you money. I mean, now people don't even see your posts. They get buried on all the platforms. But this, the era we're talking about, the early nib. I mean, it's weird to talk about this as like in the past, but it was a different era that existed for a while where everybody got smartphones, and there was so much money being pumped into media because the amount of attention that was paid to social media networks and news was, it might be the highest in history ever, and maybe even going forward ever, because it was just a fire hose. You could publish something, we regularly had over 1 million people reading single pieces. And, you could post something that was good and get 500,000 Facebook shares. That wasn't uncommon. And, now you post something on Facebook, and I have
the little cricket icon.
I have tens of thousands of followers, and it just doesn't even serve it to them. And it says, and you look at and it's 3 likes, and one of them's your dad, and you're like, holy shit, this isn't getting out to anyone anymore.
But if you pay us,
we'll
send it around
to boost everything.
Yeah, and that's part of my thing. I don't even worry about the whole SEO thing anymore for doing this show. It's just the guys who care about this stuff know about it. They start sharing it. They're usually sharing it outside of just standard social media platforms. They're just emailing people with, hey, you should check this out. So I also had this the thing I came across last week. Warren Ellis, the comics and science fiction writer, had some post about just wanting to have a blog and not even promoting it on social media. He's got his email list, and he's like, I'm thinking of just, why bother? There's nothing to post. It's not going to go anywhere. You guys actually subscribe to my list. Therefore, you care about what I do, which is one of those self-defeating things that, much as we've seen in the comics world where you get an aging demographic. But not to sound all apocalyptic and terrible about the future of media, but what comes after the nib for you? We're skipping the part where the nib is closing after 10 years, but we can get to that too.
More comics. I know a lot of people are sad about the closure of the nib, particularly all the readers that paid for it and read the newsletter every morning. But it's been a long process for me, and obviously
there's stuff we can't talk about, but
it's much more it's fine now. I'm just saying, I'm like, I started this process a long time ago, so I've moved through all the emotions and all that. But one of the things that makes me feel okay with this decision is that everybody's still doing comics. All the editorial team I worked with is doing comics. I think to a person, they all have graphic novel deals.
Yeah, I keep seeing everyone who was on the masthead, at the top is basically got an upcoming book.
Yeah, so. And all the contributors are. And so for me, comics, not political cartoons, because I stopped doing those in 2021. But right now, Genre comics is kind of my deal. Like, see, I've become known as a political cartoonist, but the truth is I've had interest in all this kind of stuff, even mainstream stuff. I think I might end up, don't be surprised if I end up writing some mainstream stuff. I'd like to take a stab at that.
When I first met Jeff Lemire and read that great book, the first big one, I'm blanking on the name of the county in Canada, the 3-part thing, and then seeing DC, masthead form, like, God bless you, man. You built a indie career. You found a comfort zone.
He's kind of a good example of guys who have moved between
and still doing his own projects,
creator-owned work and mainstream work. And then right now, my mind is kind of in this. I love this dystopian fiction stuff. So I do this series, Justice Warriors, with Ben Clarkson. We're going to be doing more of those. I guess I can say it because it's not like a project that I'm working on or even or announced, but like my Wasteland characters, I want to blow that out into something. I definitely don't feel done with those characters. And then, someday, I don't have an idea right now, but I think someday I'll circle back. I need a break from nonfiction, but I know that someday I'll circle back and, try to do my big nonfiction graphic novel. So I want to tick all the boxes, man. I want to write I'll write some mainstream superhero comics. I read that stuff my whole life. I got ideas about, what I would do with the characters. I want to do all kinds of comics.
Where'd comics start for you?
At the absolute youngest age. I don't even remember when I got into them, really. I mean, I do kind of. There's some really specific comics I remember as my first comics. So it was like, when my dad would, I didn't grow up in a very Catholic household. I grew up in a nominally Catholic household whose basically non-religious parents thought that I needed to go to Sunday school. Catholic,
Okay.
They just like, and I was like, even at a very young age, I was like, this is odd because we don't go to church regularly. Or like what?
People are wondering why I'm here and not anywhere else.
I think they just thought you were supposed to do that or something, because they were raised Catholic. But the best part of Sunday school was when my dad would pick me up and we would go around the block to a place called the News Depot. This is in Canton, Ohio, by the way. And he would get whatever he read. I don't even remember, but he would buy me stuff, and. He pushed Mad Magazine on me early, which in retrospect was obviously great and an influence on me. I read Mad Magazine for years, all throughout my childhood and teenage years. The X-Men were big. I immediately got into the X-Men, like Mark Silvestri era.
I was Claremont and Byrne
Wolverine.
As a child.
Yeah.
It was a weird thing being a 9-year-old and seeing Phoenix commit suicide. It was one of those like, I'm not sure I'm supposed to be reading this, but whatever. I'll just open this Frank Miller Daredevil instead. And things went rapidly downhill. But
and then also Tales from the Crypt reprints, EC comic reprints were on the stands at that time, and I was eating that stuff up. So I was getting different eras, and which I'm in retrospect really grateful for. But all of that stuff had an influence on me.
Especially when you don't know that they're different.
Yeah.
In your child mind, you're fusing all these things into this is what comics are.
Yeah.
Not this is what comics were in the 50s. This is what, it's got to be fantastic.
And, this is right on the cusp of the Image era. So I got really into all those artists. I mean, Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee were megastars in my mind, and I read everything that they did and read Image for years, and I copied their drawings, and that's what I was going to do when I grew up, right? Is do that kind of work. And then, of course, you
get corrupted by indie comics.
Yeah, well, then, talk about Dan Clowes being here. Then when I was 17, 18, I discovered Dan Clowes and all the rest of that generation of indie cartoonists, and my focus shifts dramatically. And then a few years later, 9/11 happens, and I'm starting to I'm reading the work of Tom Tomorrow and Ruben Balling and Durf, and then my focus shifts dramatically again. But I kept all that stuff with me. I still love Jim Lee. I'm not one who I don't disown that stuff as stuff that is just for kids. I still love it. I mean, I've read his contemporary work when he does runs on Batman and Superman and stuff. I love it all.
Biggest surprise of the nib era in terms of there's also proudest accomplishment in terms of pissing somebody off. That's
oh God, I have to.
yeah, the angriest thing you got from somebody of relative renown.
Wow, I don't. God, I'd have to really think about that one. I mean, I don't. We didn't have any like major controversies.
No cease and desists from like Speaker of the House or anything.
No, one time one of my comics made it on the floor of the House during a. I want to say it was the Obamacare debate, or one of them, because there was
there was the
votes,
implementation and then everything else after. And,
But I did a comic. I'm going to forget how the actual comic went because
it's a blur. It's okay.
It involved some sort of analogy to a seatbelt fine, because it was like conservatives were making an argument about being fined if you don't sign up for Obamacare, and they were making kind of absurd. They were taking it to the ends of the earth with the logic of it. So I did some comic about if seatbelt fines were enforced in a similar way, or how you don't think a seatbelt law is fundamentally tyrannical, although extreme libertarians do.
Well, it's because they never mind. There's a horrible joke about them not being able to get their dates into the children's seat. But anyway, that's I would mangle that joke if I did it. So we'll just leave that aside.
So I forget, the representative printed it out giant and showed it on the floor of Congress, which was a cool moment. So that's different than what you asked, though. I'm not. God.
It was the rage, more internet rage, as opposed to political celebrity rage.
Comics don't make the news anymore.
Yeah,
and I don't know if the targets of them actually see them. I'm pretty sure they don't. Certainly not on the national level, no matter how popular they get.
I'll say, it was one of I think Matt Hancock in the UK. I was on a web workshop with him during pandemic era stuff because of my bizarre day job that has nothing to do with this, but in which I have more in common with you than I do with the podcast. He had a Martin Rosen illustration of him on his shelf behind him, and I know how little Martin regards Matt Hancock, and it was just one of those like. Yeah, and I asked him when I recorded with him years ago, and he's like, "Oh yeah, politicians always want your drawings of them, even if it's the most horrible, scathing thing you did."
This is what I hear from kind of the older generation of like newspaper editorial cartoonists. I know a lot of those people and befriended them over the years, and they would tell me, they said, "You wouldn't believe who I've sold cartoons to: Donald Rumsfeld, Karl Rove," and to me,
David Levine had that. I think he refused to sell to people he was destroying in the next administration. I don't think
I would sell to Rove or Rumsfeld myself, to be honest, even if it was the most vicious cartoon that I did some vicious cartoons about them. But to me, it's like a flex on the buyer's behalf. Like they care.
Want to show their power.
There's no accountability for them. And they're just like, look, all these guys made fun of me and drew caricatures. And like, it's just, I guess it's a fun time for them. Yeah. Something to hang up in their trophy room.
Whereas all I can envision is Levine's Lyndon Johnson with that appendectomy scar that looks like Vietnam, and just I'm not sure if I'm Lyndon Johnson I want that hanging on my wall, but that's again, like you say, my big lesson from 10 years in the lobbying world. Tangentially, I live in northern New Jersey. I'm not down in Washington itself. Power and the proximity to power is human nature, in terms of everything we learned from Shakespeare onwards about that need for access to it, even if you're not the person with power itself. That's why when a lot of non-combatants ask me about why would this politician say X, Y, and Z, I'm like, because he just wants to be closer to power. It's not like he believes anything he's saying. It's just
it's
how they are.
Next step.
Yeah, it's just freaky. But as far as contributors go, were there people you sort of had on a dream list that holy shit, I can't believe I got?
Yeah, God, I mean,
you mentioned Tom Tomorrow, of course, but
yeah, he was probably he was definitely one of our longest running contributors. When it started out, I don't remember exactly when I met Dan, but a lot of those guys, I mean, Durf and Dan Perkins and Ken Fisher, who is Ruben Balling. Yeah. They were guys I really looked up to. Now they're my buddies, or in some cases, people I pay, or that was like my dream. That type of cartoonist was my dream lineup when I started. But I eventually wanted to go after some really bigger names. And, I didn't get a lot of the, like the dream list for me would be like, never got anything from Joe Sacco, actually. I've met with him.
I was going to ask how much of an influence he's been on your career, but, we'll get to that after.
His main thing, I think, is he's always working on a graphic novel, and he doesn't really do short form work, so I never ended up getting anything from him. And, I got Ivan Brunetti to do a couple cartoons for me. And that guy, man, reading Schizo, that stuff was a trip.
I had a girlfriend who threatened to leave if I did not get rid of the first 2 issues of Schizo. So back in the mid 90s, the really hard ones. Yeah. And it was just, I'll just tell her I threw them out. She'll never find them. But it was one of those. I understand to a normal human being why these comics are horrifying, but we sat down and recorded years later, and I was very happy to see that the person who did those comics in the 90s was able to
he seems like a much different in a much different place these days, which is good. Though I'm glad we have that work. And I don't know how we hooked up, but I think I just do what I do. I just write people, and then after
that's how we do this.
After a while, people know of the Nib now and stuff, and I never got. I mean, I would have loved to have got something from Chris Ware or Dan Klaus and stuff. They don't, they're not doing the usual type of stuff that we do at the Nib. But like with Ivan Bernetti, I mean, he wasn't doing hyper political cartoons. He did a couple topical comics, and they fit, especially in the magazine, because there's a little bit more breadth to what you can get away with. So those are the kind of big names that I didn't get. Like Ivan Bernetti was a really cool get. God, there's honestly so many I'm kind of going to forget, because
I know I sort of feel terrible asking things like that, because afterwards you're going to say,
I know I'm going to remember, but we've had over like 400 contributors.
But going in the other direction, rather than the great white heroes that we have for a lot of these things, you talk a little about the diversity of contributors you've had, because it really, I marvel over it when I look at just the sheer amount of people I'd never heard of, and then seeing a lot of faces that don't look like ours. In the
well, that happened because we went for it consciously, but also because those are the people who are drawing a lot of comics now. It wasn't really that hard to diversify, that much.
It's still as if you're not looking. So,
well, I think specifically like indie comics. I mean, you go to these shows like CXC and SPX. I mean, it's extremely queer now.
Yeah.
And, less white. It's not, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's far less white than it used to be, and less male. But when the Nib started out, it was very white, honestly. And I guess, I don't want to defend it, but I would just, I was picking from the people that I knew of, and the people
that Same thing with the show. If you don't make that conscious effort, the guys you know are the guys you knew.
But, this is the early 2010s, and that type of, like, diversify media was a big push for progressives, and so I did it, and like I said, it wasn't that challenging, because there were so many people coming up that were different than the previous generation. I mean, there was a lot more women drawing comics. There was a lot more queer people drawing comics. One of our books that we put out is called Be Gay Do Comics, and it's a collection of all these queer comics. It's like memoir, history, satire, everything. And I didn't set out to consciously create a queer anthology. We talked about collecting, I think it would have been our second Nib collection by then. And like, maybe instead of just collecting all the best stuff from the last 5 years, we do like a theme. And it was just sort of like, we got a book of queer comics just because there are so many queer cartoonists and then once the Nib becomes a place that people know they can pitch, they pitch their nonfiction ideas. So there's a lot of people, of all sorts of different backgrounds who are working in indie comics. And, first of all, everyone, for the most part, seems to be incredibly political, much more so than there used to be, although there didn't used to be social media back in the day either. So I don't know. But everybody's at least fiercely political online. Their work might not be. They might do YA stuff about a puffball or whatever it is they do. But when they have an idea for a nonfiction comic, they might not devote their life to nonfiction, but when they have an idea for a nonfiction comic, be it, memoir about their experience or their identity, or, I can go to these protests and draw people and, interview them and quote them and stuff. They knew that they could come to the Nib then. So people start pitching us, and then, you have to do a lot less active seeking when you become kind of the outlet that we became.
Did you feel a sense of responsibility? I mean, there's the job responsibility part of it, but
sure.
Not that it went to your head, but anything. But, was that a sense of, holy crap, I'm part of a team that's doing this?
Especially
during the Trump years, I'm sure that was a...
Oh, yeah. Well, what happened during when Trump got in, it was an emergency in a lot of ways. But we started getting, I remember that January of
2017 when elected 16
January.
I was down on the Hill around that time, and it was everybody was in shock.
We got inundated with pitches. I mean, more than we could handle, and everybody had it was political cartoons, but it was also like, it was everything. It was like, explaining the rise of the right, and I don't know, we need to reject racism, and they're going after immigrants, and it was important to cover it all as much as we could. So there was a huge responsibility there to not give even coverage in the way that they talk about in mainstream media, but to try to cover
the panoply of what was happening.
And try to get it, and talking about diversity, trying to get a diversity of artists, especially because it felt like, we need to hear from people of color at this time, and we need to, can we get a Muslim cartoonist to write about what this feels like, or can we get, things like that. Women to talk about reproductive rights, and queer people to talk about the assault on queer people and stuff like that. So there was a lot of, it did feel like, you had to take a lot into consideration to, during that time,
as opposed to the awful thing that everybody says to Dan Perkins, Tom Tomorrow, which I also said in 2016 before the election. Well, at least it gives you a lot of good material, which I wasn't thinking, and I didn't realize quite how bad things were going to get. But
I've also, people have said that to me my whole career, and during the Bush years when they started out, and in the Trump years, and it's kind of like, a lot of material that is terrible, and when you stick your head in it, it's like, sticking your head into a sewage pipe that's blasting out 24/7. And I'm, I wasn't even just doing my own work. I'm doing all these, publishing every single day. And it definitely got exhausting on a profound level of just, being outraged constantly. There was a lot to be outraged about, and it was too much. Every day was something new. It was
off mic. I will tell you some stories that I can't repeat on mic, but things I went through during all the last couple of years. But the sense of relief.
Yeah, like that period I'm talking about is, knock on wood, over. I'm not going to make any predictions about the election after what happened last time. Sense of relief.
We'll just go into where we are right now.
I hope it's, if it does get worse, the Nib won't be here for it. It would be, someone else has to take up the reins, I guess. So yes, a sense of relief. In some ways I feel like I've done my duty. But, I realized recently, just the Nib has only been ended for, I guess, the month of September. But then I had, some trailing work and to do when it closed. And then just 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I had my first kind of actual post-Nib work week. And I realized that I do not receive and send 200 emails a day.
Yeah.
And that took up a lot of my brain space for a decade. And it's kind of a weird come down, like I don't have to be up on everything that's happening. I don't have to be assigning stories and, why this cartoonist is late. What can we slot in tomorrow? And, it was a mad scramble every single day. And, so I'm now kind of, looking at the positive aspects of closing the nib, and that is kind of one of that. I'm just like, I didn't want to do that the rest of my life, honestly.
Yeah, or it would be a short life, where you end up with he ended up dying right at the desk while he was writing an email to a contributor. Years ago, I bumped into Graydon Carter at the airport in Ottawa. At the time, he was on the way out from Vanity Fair, and we shot the breeze for a little bit. And afterwards, I emailed him and said, I know this will sound weird, but I went through something similar because I left trade magazines and went into doing this trade association and lobbying stuff. I said, but as far as I know, you're about to enter the first period of your life where you don't have a thing coming out regularly. Yeah. And, I know age, et cetera, whatever, but it's going to be weird for you to just not have I have proofs I have to say. Within a year, he ended up launching Airmail and putting out a weekly email anyway, because much as I did with my day job, I started doing a newsletter every week because you want to have that recurring thing going on. But yeah, it hits you occasionally what that absence is like when something is so,
Yeah, I mean, I published something. I mean, my own work. I used to do 3 editorial cartoons a week, and then I went down to 1 running the nib, and I was still doing 1,000 other things. And so this is the first period of my life where this is the first 2-week period of my adult life where I haven't had immediate deadlines.
And then you're stuck here at a festival with some schlub from New Jersey.
Although
I
have been traveling a lot and I did SPX and this, so I'm still kind of like doing a lot of things, but no, I'm ready for it, and I'm not. People are like, "Oh, you taking some time off?" No, because I don't have an income really, and I have kids. I need it. I mean, my wife has a job. Everything's fine, but I do need to work and also want to work. I mean, I'm kind of the nib and the nib magazine was only one of my ideas. It just happened to be. I mean, I've tried to do a lot of other things, and they've failed. So from the outside, my career looks maybe successful, and it is. But you've seen the things that I actually have worked out, and I've got off the ground.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. So I always have ideas. I got a ton of stuff, and I'm basically sitting on a lot of ideas for comics that I haven't been able to get to. So I do feel like, I got plenty to work on. I don't, whether or not how much money I can make on them or whatever is a sort of a different story. But I can absolutely fill my days, with comics.
And doing this sort of valedictory goodbye tour. Mm-hmm. And I was at the reception yesterday. I left before you got to karaoke. I don't know if you did any songs yourself, but
no, I'm one of those unfun people that doesn't get up and do karaoke. I belt it out. If everybody's singing along, I belt it out too.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that, but I don't like.
Listen, I was weirded out when all the 20-something kids were getting up and picking songs I'd never heard of. I'm like, apparently people know these songs. I don't, because I'm a goddamned old man. But
I know, man. I had that same feeling because there's all these younger cartoonists and CCAD students, and I mean, they're all joining in, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then it was funny. You walked out into the bar, and there's a cover band playing 90s rock songs, and it's like they're doing everything, right? They're doing STP, Smashing Pumpkins, whatever,
Nirvana, and everything else.
And I know every single word to every single song, and I'm,
you realize
I'm old now.
Yeah. And, you mentioned turning 40 before we started recording, and that's a nice, seg into the next stage.
I definitely don't view myself as old. I'm fine with the turning 40 thing, but it's one thing is you're certainly not young anymore. You cannot, and I'm not. And I don't know the songs the kids are playing. I don't.
But keeping up with the comics, I'm sure was I don't want to say a challenge, but much in the same way you're dealing with the outrage and everything else, you also have to stay up on who's making what and making sure there are fresh voices coming in. Even being able to step back from that, I'm sure you'll keep up with, who's cartooning, but it won't be a professional obligation.
No, that would be great. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that's great about these shows is you find out who's coming up. And, I went to there was a slideshow comics reading type thing at the first night party. And Ben Passmore read a nib piece, but most of the people, and Caroline Cash, who's like kind of an up and coming indie cartoonist, she did one strip for us. Towards the end, it was cool to have a comic from her because she seems like she's blown up. But there was a bunch of other people. I'd never heard of them in my life. And I used to be the type of cartoonist that was asked to do these things, like when there was, much when I was younger in my career. And I thought most of it was good. And I was like, you could go around and buy their mini comics afterwards and everything. And
speaking of, I have a couple of zines I have to give you before you split. But tell me about, besides Joe Sacco, the influences and what moved you into editorial and then political cartooning and journalism.
Yeah. I mean, the work Joe Sacco did as in comics journalism is,
besides the most important person in the sector.
But I mean, my influences are all over the place. Like I was saying, Jim Lee, man. I mean, well, he's a special guest here at CXC. Dan Klaus is probably a single most influential guy for me. I mean, he looms large. I mean, I read his work early at a really foundational time. Like his kind of sense of humor and the different types of styles he works in, I mean, I loved. And I actually I think I do like if I have something that's a natural style, it's a little bit more realistic and detailed, which I don't get to work in often. But
I wondered, with the apocalyptic stuff and that visual style, how much of that is yours and how much of that is the time that you're... Well, anyway, go on. Yeah.
Well, if you look at like the graphic novel I did, War is Boring, with David Axe, that's nonfiction. That's drawn a little more realistically. I mean, you can look at it and see it's me, but the style, I guess, that I'm known for, the editorial cartoons, I really had to try to like cartoon up my style, which I think makes it better work and more readable and more funny as a political cartoon. But if I was drawing, more mainstream work or a sci-fi thing or whatever, I revert more to that slightly more realistic and detailed style. And I guess there are, like Klaus, there's cartoonists who kind of have this spectrum of their style. They have like the more parsed down cartoony stuff and then the more detailed, realistic level to their work. And I guess I'm probably going to push the dial back more towards the detailed stuff. Maybe I don't know. I guess that's just how I feel more comfortable doing, even though it takes longer to.
Yeah, but you have a little more time. Yeah. So we all think we have a little more time. At least you won't have the pressure.
Pick up my daughter at the bus stop at 3:40 p.m. every day, so I don't have too much time to get to drawing.
That was the thing I always ask cartoonists is the daily practice and all this, and it usually does revolve around household responsibilities and family duty.
But influences. I mean, they're all over the place. I don't know. Like, obviously, the all weekly cartoonists are really the biggest influence on my political cartoons.
Sure.
Just the multi-panel stuff, the very idiosyncratic styles. Some like, I don't know. I can see someone like Durf, honestly, because he did a lot of gross stuff in his strips, and I like doing gross stuff and mutants and bulging eyes and people who look weird and everything. So that kind of, that's in there. And then I started doing these Wasteland and comics with cyborgs and mutants and everything to do political cartoons. Because honestly, it was really about keeping myself interested in political cartoons, which I felt kind of very draining and creatively limited. And, going back to things I've been saying to you, it's like I have long-standing interests in various genres, and it was me trying to incorporate that stuff into my work so that it would feel fresh and just interesting to me even.
And fleeing America?
Everybody talks about moving to Canada. It happened to me. I didn't flee, though, because I didn't want to live here. It was my wife is Canadian, and during the pandemic, she was like, kind of out of the blue, was like, we gotta. I mean, it was hard. We had our second kid born 2 months before the pandemic lockdowns. We had a 3-year-old at the time too, and she was in school for something called epidemiology. She was in grad school for that. And, the argument was made that life would be a lot easier if we moved to Canada. They have free pre-K. They have famously, universal health care, and moving to her hometown would put us close to her family who could help out. I mean, I was really resistant to the idea at first. Like when it was put to me, I was like, I don't want to leave, the country that I'm from and have lived in my entire life. But it made sense. I mean, it made sense for the family. And, I think it makes sense for even my career. I mean, being a cartoonist, being somewhere where you can get healthcare or just life is a little bit easier, especially with a family, is good for the long term, particularly now when I have unemployed myself. But, I don't care about the same things I cared about when I was in my 20s. I lived in Portland, Oregon for 14 years. I really miss it. But you move to a small town in kind of the middle of nowhere, Ontario. I don't live near Toronto. You can afford a much bigger house. It would cost me millions, honestly, millions of dollars in Portland to get the size house that I have. And so now I'm comfortable, right? I have a nice home office. We need multiple bedrooms because both me and my wife work from home and we have 2 kids. So once you get to that level, you're like, oh shit, we need a 5-bedroom home to function here.
Yeah, many years ago, I was on a business trip. I was visiting a client in Spokane, Washington, and the manager of the company was a guy from Pennsylvania, New Jersey too. And he was taking me on a drive around Spokane, and then he drove by his house, and he's like, Gil, look at the size of that house. How much do you think that costs? Blank. He's like, $240,000. Yeah. And I'm overlooking the entire valley. You know what this would cost in Pennsylvania? I'm like, yeah, no, I understand, Joel.
Yeah, there's trade-offs, but I've made peace with it, and I'm enjoying my nice house and huge backyard.
Yeah. And just in terms of national perspective, just being I know we're all globalized because we're all online all the time, but are you seeing things any differently being outside America?
Yeah, a little bit.
More Canadian exposure.
Canada is not that far culturally from the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is the only country that shares a border with Canada, and much of their culture and their news even focuses on the U.S. But, things are just a little more chill. Now, I obviously still care what happens. Basically, 95% of people I know and love are here. Yeah. But having left political cartooning, and I pay attention a little less. And the culture wars are just a little less intense in Canada. It's not a perfect place. There's not, it's not perfect. There's a conservative rightist movement.
Especially during the lockdown era, hearing all the was it the truck convoys and things like that?
Convoys, they used to drive by mass, but they're not. It's not as big as in the States, and so like masks are a good example. I didn't think there was a huge controversy with masks in Canada. Like the vaccine uptake is, I forget the percentage, but it's like 90%, right? Whereas unfortunately in the US it's much lower. That's big problem. And masks, it was like everybody had universal mask adoption, and then once the vaccines started coming out, it goes down, and then pretty much no one wears them anymore. And it just seemed to be less of a flashpoint, it's just everything, there's not school shootings all the time, thank God, and stuff like that. So when I hear about it, my social media feeds are mostly American, and everybody I know is here, like I said, but it's nice after having my head in the news for basically 20 years straight to just have a little bit of distance from it.
A buffer has got to help. Again, tied with both the career and with the move like this. But who have you been reading?
Who have I been reading?
And it could be prose, comics, whatever.
Yeah. I've been trying to... one of my pandemic indulgences or coping mechanisms was buying a bunch of comics, like buying everything I want to have read. Yeah. So, and I haven't got to them all yet, actually. It's probably going to take me a few years to work through this pile. But, I spent a few $1,000s on, omnibuses. And
all those big, 40 issues and
what am I reading? I'm reading a lot of different stuff. I'm slowly making my way through Tom King's Batman run in between other things. I one of my big gaps in indie cartooning is Love and Rockets. I've actually never read it other than a couple random things here and there. So I splurged on that big-ass box set from Fantagraphics.
Oh, the first 50 issues?
Yeah.
It's a marvel.
I think I'm, starting it when I go home. I'm going to try to take my time with it.
The early ones are weird.
Yeah.
The style isn't, for either of them, the style isn't where it is. Beto was farther ahead early. Like he was doing Palomar stories at the beginning that were up there with Garcia Marquez. Jaime took a while. He's still working through the sci-fi influences for a bit. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but this is all stuff from 40 years ago that's still, embedded in me. When we talk, by the way, about the transition to indie comics, it was literally my freshman year of college, a drummer from Texas who was on my floor saying, dude, don't read those superhero things, read this instead, and handed me an issue of Love and Rockets, and that pretty much just changed everything at 18 or so for me.
Yeah.
But that's great.
I'm going to be reading Klaus's new book, probably, on the plane home.
Yeah, I was going to say, do it on the flight. just immerse yourself in it. You're going to love it.
God, what else have I been reading? I love creator-owned comics. I bought a big ass stack of Image comics, like all the Image comics, basically that are highly regarded of the last few years. So I'm reading Department of Truth and I think it's called Ice Cream Man.
It's another thing Warren Ellis had recommended. I picked up the big hardcover of the first 12 issues. I haven't read it yet. It's supposed to be a really great horror.
Bitter Root, Stray Dogs. I like all this stuff, but I'm also really sort of consciously trying to pivot and immerse myself in this stuff because I want to do like these types of creator-owned comics. And whereas I can't believe I used to do this. I used to go online in the morning and I used to read everybody's political cartoons. Most of the stuff I don't even like sort of the mainstream political cartoons. There's a lot of great people, but I would read even the stuff that I don't like, Michael Ramirez and Glenn McCoy and all the right-wingers and stuff, just to get the state of the industry and see what people are doing. And a theme we keep coming back to here is I'm glad I'm not paying attention to that stuff anymore.
It's been the same thing with blowing up Twitter and getting rid of my feed. It's like, how much time was I spending every morning just
getting mad?
Yeah.
And I am trying to, my time is limited. I got small kids. I got work I need to do. So I am trying to, really consciously focus my free time, my leisure time on reading that
productively as opposed to
I'm reading. I am reading this stuff with the kind of intent of which I've always done with comics, is I'm reading it because I love it and for entertainment. But I'm also I want to see what people are doing. I want to see how they're writing comics. I want to see how the artists are making stuff work. I'm studying the shit.
Last question, especially for somebody with 2 kids who does post-apocalyptic comics like you do, retaining hope.
Yeah, man. It's hard to, but you kind of have to. If I have, unsurprisingly, most of my friends are on the left, and there's varying degrees of doomerism, particularly around the climate. It's not like we're going to be fixing this anytime soon, or perhaps at all.
And with your new countrymen burning down that woods in Quebec and stinking me out back in New Jersey.
It's not good. We have, I do this series, Justice Warriors, and it's very political, and I would say that it's very dark humor, and it's not about the future being hopeful necessarily. But in day-to-day life, I think I realized during the pandemic especially, things were so bad in the world and on social media. We reached peak negativity and doomerism. And it sounds corny, I guess, but you have to actually make a choice not to do that to yourself at some point. If you are progressive and you think the world can be better, obviously politically it might be very hard to make that possible, but you have to believe that on some level we can actually do this someday. Otherwise you devolve to nihilism. And I have to get up in the morning and talk about how much time you're wasting on Twitter. I got to get up in the morning and get my kids fed and get them off to school, and I can't be mad about something I read online. I can't be telling them things are horrible and never getting better. I mean, that would be, I just don't, I have a responsibility to not like become mired in this stuff. And I have kind of a, this will be getting way ahead of myself. I should save this for a next interview we do someday. Yeah. If I get those Wasteland comics done like I want to do, I'm developing a theory of what they're about, and they take place in a world that's obviously, you know, blasted, and the blasted wasteland, and people are irradiated and everything. But it's I'm coming to these themes of it's going to be about work and sort of like, you know, if the Mad Max world is real, it's like, you know, you work for the warlord. I mean, it's like the apocalypse happens, but the same types of relationships and hierarchies.
Yeah. HR is
you still got to go to work. Yeah. I mean, you still got to work for somebody, right? Who controls the means of production or whatever. But you still have choices within that world, and I kind of want it to be not hopeful, but in a way actually using that like apocalyptic stuff to sort of talk about like, well, the world might be bad, but like you are able to make some change within it or improve your position. We're not going to create a leftist utopia, sadly. I don't think within our lifetimes, at least. But I don't think that I think you have to think that some things can get better. You know, they do throughout time, right? Throughout history. Not everything does, but I mean, we used to have kings and we used to have slaves, and I think it's some things can get better. I really do feel like some people got I had to like unfollow people and stuff online because they're just like,
yeah. There's a good deal of muting I had to do because I'm like, I like that you exist, but you're bringing me down.
Well, and at some point, it's not actually about objective reality. It's just about people are addicted to their phones, and you know, everything seems like you have to be paying attention to it at all times, and that everything is extremely consequential. And you know, there's a couple pieces I've read that talk about it as an era of hyper politics that we were in, where everything was happening very fast, everything was politicized. You know, people, if you spend a ton of time in it, you find yourself arguing about, you know, whatever, like the new Little Mermaid movie and how they cast a black actor in the main role and everything, because like Ben Shapiro's mad about it, and then you watch his video and you're like, well, these fucking idiots, you know, because then you're posting about them, and you know, you can just not do this to yourself.
That was we'll close with this anecdote, or imagine this moment. I'm on a train back from Washington D.C. up to New Jersey. The guy next to me, I see on his iPhone, he's got a Ben Shapiro podcast going, and I just take out my iPad, I put on Prince's Sign of the Times concert movie, and just put on my headphones and grooved on that, and just thought, whatever. That guy's got his thing. I got my thing. I bet I'm a much happier person than he is. So, you know. Yeah,
those people are miserable and not listening to Prince as much as we are.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for coming on. I hope we get together next project, or, you know, we'll be at TCAF or something. I know you're nowhere close to Toronto, but, you know.
Yeah, I should be there. That reminds me, I need to apply for the table.
Yeah. And citizenship. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But thanks again, man.
All right. Thanks, man.
And that was Matt Boris. Go check out his site, mattboris.com, to see more of his work, including Justice Warriors and War is Boring. And that's mattbors.com. And check out the Archives of the Nib. That's THENIB.com, to see so many of the great artists Matt and his colleagues published over 10 years, and to check out Matt's work, especially the Wasteland strips. Now, Matt's on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the same handle, Matt Boris, all one word, spelled the same way as the website. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast, comes out every week, with really fascinating conversations with really interesting, creative people. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM, or by using our Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can go up to 3 minutes. So if you go longer than that, you'll get cut off. Just call back, leave another message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with listeners, but I would never run something like that without the speaker's permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I appreciate the gesture, and I've got a Patreon, and my Substack has a paid tier, but blah, blah, blah. Other people need money more. Your resources in general can go towards people's medical bills, car payments, rent, their veterinary bills, getting an artistic project off the ground, subscribing to something like the Nib. You can find all that stuff through like GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and all those other crowdfunding platforms. And when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank. I gave them an extra donation this month for Thanksgiving. Give to the Poor People's Campaign, election funds, freedom funds, Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice. And well, there's a lot of things you can do with your money to help build a better world. So, I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.